The command ship hung in space above 442B like a massive predator waiting to strike. Commander Vex stood on the bridge, watching the planet below through the viewport. The world was small, cold, and insignificant. Everything about it screamed weakness. "Sensors show one human research station in the northern continent," reported his tactical officer. "Minimal defenses, no military presence." Vex nodded. This was expected. Humans were primitives. They built fragile structures and called them progress. They hid on distant planets and pretended they were safe. The Empire did not tolerate such arrogance. The Empress herself had ordered this mission. Empress sat on the throne of the Empire, and she had grown tired of humanity. The humans had started expanding into Sector 7. They had started building colonies. They had started breeding like insects across the stars. Something had to be done. "Send down the assault team," Vex commanded. "Kill everyone, burn the station, leave nothing behind." The landing craft descended through the planet's atmosphere like falling meteors. 20 soldiers poured out, their armor reflecting the pale light of the distant sun. They moved with the efficiency of a civilization that had conquered hundreds of worlds. Nothing could stop them, nothing ever had. The human research station was small, built into the side of a mountain to protect against the harsh climate. The soldiers breached the doors with thermal charges. Alarms screamed through the corridors. Humans emerged from their workstations, confused and terrified. "Please," one woman shouted. She was older, her hair streaked with gray. "We are scientists, we mean no harm." Vex did not care. He raised his weapon and fired. The woman fell. Others ran, but there was nowhere to go. The soldiers were too fast, too strong, too armed. Within minutes, the station fell silent except for the sound of destruction and fire. Then one of the soldiers found something. "Commander," the soldier called out from a sealed chamber, "we have a survivor." Vex approached the chamber. Inside, huddled behind a large metal container, was a small human, a child. The boy could not have been more than 7 years old. His eyes were wide with terror and tears streamed down his face. "Kill it," Vex said without hesitation. "Wait," another voice called out. The soldier who had found the child was holding something. In his other hand was a photograph. It showed the woman they had killed moments before, standing with the small boy. They were smiling. "Perhaps we should bring it to the Empress." Vex paused. The Empress did enjoy trophies. "No," a voice cried from deeper in the chamber. "No, please, not my son, please." They found the woman behind a protective barrier. She was injured, bleeding from a wound in her side. Her name was Doctor. She had hidden her son and tried to hide herself, but the barrier would not last long. "Let my boy live," begged. "Take me. Do whatever you want to me, just let him live." Vex looked at the woman, then at the child. He considered his orders. The Empress wanted a statement. She wanted to show the galaxy that humanity was finished. A trophy would work perfectly for that. "Bring the child," Vex commanded. "As for the mother, execute her." "No," screamed. He struggled as a soldier picked him up and lifted him high. The boy's small fists hammered against the soldier's armor uselessly. "Mother, mother!" Lunged forward, but her wounded body was too weak. A soldier blocked her path. She collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath her. Her final moments were spent watching her son being carried away, disappearing through the corridors of the research station as it burned around them. Was taken to the landing craft. He was placed in a containment cell, small enough for his size but designed to hold far larger creatures. The cell was transparent and could see the destruction through its walls as the landing craft rose into the sky. He could see the research station being consumed by flames. He could see the planet growing smaller below. He thought of his mother. He thought of the scientists who had cared for him. He thought of the gardens where he played. All of it was gone. During the journey to the capital, world was kept in isolation. A servant brought him food but said nothing. The boy ate little. He stared at the walls of his cell and tried to understand what was happening. His mother had been a survival expert. She had taught him to watch things carefully. She had taught him to think before acting. She had taught him that knowledge was more valuable than fear. So began to watch. When the servant came, noticed the patterns. He noted the times, the routes, the guards who passed by. When the ship made stops at stations, he listened to the conversations outside his cell. They did not think of him as someone who could understand their language. They spoke freely in his presence, discussing their routes, their schedules, their security protocols. The capital world was enormous. Massive towers pierced the sky, and the buildings were constructed from materials did not recognize. Flying vehicles moved between the structures in precise patterns. Everything was clean, organized, and cold. The containment cell was transferred through dozens of corridors. Finally, it was placed in a large chamber. The walls were made of transparent material, allowing to see into the vast imperial palace beyond. Servants moved through elegant hallways. Guards stood at attention. And somewhere beyond all of this, he knew, was the Empress herself. Entered the chamber. He was smaller than the soldiers, his armor less ornate. His name was Keeper Prime Silos, and he had been assigned a new task by the Empress herself. He was to keep the human alive. He was to maintain it. He was to teach it enough of their ways that it could serve as a demonstration of human inferiority. Keeper Prime Silos opens containment cell. The boy stepped out slowly, looking around at everything with careful eyes. "You are human," Keeper Prime Silos said in his language. "You are weak, you are inferior, you will learn our ways, you will show the galaxy why your species will never rise above slavery." Said nothing. He was 7 years old and he had just watched his mother die. He had lost everything. But as he stood in the imperial palace of the empire, he began to think like his mother had taught him. 7 years had passed since arrived at the imperial palace. The boy had become a young man of 14 years. His body was small by standards, barely reaching the chest of even the shortest guards. But his mind had become something far more dangerous than physical strength. Every day of those 7 years had watched, he had listened, he had learned. He had memorized the guard rotation patterns, noting that the western corridor was lightly guarded between the hours of midnight and dawn. He had studied the technology systems, understanding how the palace doors operated and where the security scanners had blind spots. He had learned the language so completely that he could speak without an accent. He had learned their mathematics, their philosophy, their culture, their weaknesses. Lived in a small chamber attached to the main palace, away from the grand halls where nobles conducted their business. Keeper Prime Silos ensured he was fed, clothed, and kept alive. Beyond that was ignored by almost everyone. He was a curiosity, a trophy, something to point at and say, "See how inferior humanity is." The palace had thousands of servants and workers. Most of them were lower caste, born into service and accepting of their place in the rigid hierarchy. It was through one of these servants that found his first real connection. Was younger than, no more than 12 years old by standards of measurement. He was assigned to maintain's chamber, bringing water, cleaning the floor, replacing the bedding. He was nervous and quick in his movements, always looking over his shoulder as if afraid someone would punish him for existing. The first time entered's chamber without fear was when the boy spoke to him in perfect. "You do not have to be afraid," said. "I am alone here, I am not a threat to you." Stopped moving, slowly he turned to look at the human. "You speak our language." "I have learned it," said. "I have learned many things. Tell me, are all servants in the palace as fearful as you appear to be?" Over many weeks and developed a friendship. It was careful and quiet, conducted in whispers between duties. Learned about the caste system that governed society. He learned that not all supported the Empress's aggressive expansion across the galaxy. He learned that many of them questioned the endless wars, the endless conquests, the endless need to prove superiority. "My father was a soldier," said one day, his voice barely audible. "He died on a world called Sector 7. Humans killed him. The Empress says this makes humans dangerous, but my mother says the Empress sends soldiers to die and then calls it glory." Listened carefully. This was useful information. This was a weakness he had not fully understood before. "Do you hate humans?" asked. Considered this for a long time. "I did, but you are different. You are kind. You speak to me like I matter. That is not what a human is supposed to be like, according to what they teach us." "Perhaps what they teach you is wrong," said. Years passed, grew taller though still small by standards. He was 14 now, and the Empress had decided it was time to put her trophy on display. She hosted a great dinner, inviting dignitaries and military leaders from across the empire. They came to observe the great palace and to speak with the Empress about the state of her dominion, and they came to see the human. Was brought to the grand hall for the first time. The chamber was enormous, with ceilings that stretched up into shadow. Hundreds of gathered, their armor and formal robes creating a sea of color and light. They turned to stare at him as he entered. The Empress sat upon a throne of carved crystal. She was old by her species' standards, her skin marked with the patterns of age and authority. Her eyes were cold and ancient and empty of mercy. "Behold," the Empress announced to her gathered guests, "I present to you the human, captured as a young creature, raised in our civilization, educated in our ways. Observe how it has failed to adapt. Observe how it remains crude and simple despite years of exposure to our superior culture." The dignitaries leaned forward, examining with curiosity. Human, a visiting general, called out, "Speak to us, show us your thoughts." Stepped forward, he bowed, a gesture he had learned from studying customs. When he rose, he began to speak in their language. "I thank you for allowing me to stand before you," said clearly. "I have had the honor of living in the greatest palace of the greatest civilization in this galaxy. In my years here, I have learned much. I have read your histories. I have studied your mathematics. I have come to understand your philosophy. I have one question for you." The hall fell silent. Empress leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What is your question?" the Empress demanded. "If we humans are so inferior," said, "then why does your empire require soldiers to defeat us? Why do you need fleets and weapons? If we are truly primitive, would you not simply overcome us without effort?" The hall erupted in confused murmurs. This was not what anyone had expected. A human was not supposed to ask questions. A human was supposed to demonstrate inferiority through silence and obedience. The Empress's expression twisted with anger. She had brought the trophy to show the galaxy her power, and instead, the trophy had shown her a question she could not easily answer. "Remove the human," she commanded coldly. "Take it to the lower levels. Let it spend time in the dark. Perhaps suffering will teach it the respect it lacks." Guards moved forward and seized. He did not resist. As they dragged him away, he saw, watching from the shadows of a service corridor, fear written across his young face. Was thrown into a cell in the lowest levels of the palace, far below the grand halls and elegant chambers. The cell was small and cold and lit only by a faint glow from the energy barriers that held him. Here, in this darkness, expected to spend weeks, perhaps months, suffering as punishment for his insolence. Instead, he found something far more valuable than freedom. The lower levels were old. They contained records and archives from centuries of history. A security breach meant some of these archives were accessible. Found it by accident while exploring every corner of his new prison, searching for escape routes. A section of wall had cracked from age and neglect. Behind it was a chamber filled with data terminals, used his understanding of technology to access the systems. And there, in the archives, he found something that made his heart stop. A map, the location of Earth, the precise coordinates of human space, and reports of ongoing human 6 months after being imprisoned in the lower levels, heard the news that would change everything. Empress received reports from her military commanders. A human colony had repelled an invasion. The colony was on a world called 22B, located in the outer regions of Sector 7. A fleet, commanded by Admiral, had launched an attack expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had encountered resistance led by a human commander named David Shaw. The humans had used tactics that were unconventional and devastating. They had caused significant casualties among the forces. The fleet had been forced to retreat. The Empress's fury was absolute. "This cannot stand," she declared in a command broadcast that echoed through the entire palace. "These humans breed faster than we can kill them. They think their primitive tactics can challenge the might of the Empire. They will learn the cost of such arrogance." She ordered a full military mobilization. Every available warship would be prepared for deployment. Every military commander received orders to prepare for total war against humanity. The goal was simple: the complete annihilation of every human colony, every human settlement, every trace of human existence in known space. Heard all of this from his cell in the lower levels. Had found a way to bring him information, risking severe punishment if discovered. The young servant spoke in quick, urgent whispers whenever he could find a moment alone with. "It is getting worse," said, his voice shaking with anxiety. "The soldiers are being gathered. The weapons are being prepared. The Empress wants to destroy all of you. She says humans are too dangerous to allow to live. She says this was a mistake from the beginning." Listened carefully, his mind already calculating possibilities and outcomes. He thought of his mother. He thought of the research station. He thought of the Earth, which he had never seen but which lived in his memory as a place of green and blue and endless possibility. said, "Do you still have access to the palace communication systems?" Some admitted, "My work takes me to many places. Why do you ask?" "Because I need to escape," said. "And when I do, I need you to help me reach the prisoner transport that leaves the palace tomorrow." His eyes widened in shock. "That is impossible. There are guards everywhere. The security is impossible to penetrate. You would never survive." "Perhaps," said, "but I have to try. Do you know what the Empress plans to do with me?" Did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. "She's going to execute me," continued. "She will broadcast my death across human space. She will use my death as a psychological weapon to break the human resistance. She believes that showing humans that their child, raised in the palace, educated in her ways, remains a specimen to be destroyed will demoralize them. She wants to prove that humans have no future." "Yes," whispered. "That is the plan," she told the guards this morning. Nodded slowly. He had suspected this for months. The Empress had grown tired of him. He was no longer a useful trophy. He had become a problem, a threat, an embarrassment that needed to be eliminated. "Then I must go," said. "Not for myself. I do not care if I die, but there is information the Empress does not know I have discovered. Intelligence about the fleet movements, about the planned offensive against Earth itself, about strategic weaknesses that humans could exploit. This information must reach my people." Stared at the human boy. For a long moment, nothing was said between them, then reached into his service pouch and produced a small device. It was a command override, the kind used by maintenance workers to open sealed doors. "I will help you," said simply. "But you must understand something. If you escape, there will be consequences. The Empress will blame me. I will likely be executed for aiding you." "I know," said. "I am sorry for this." "Do not be sorry," said. "Do not be sorry for anything. If you can hurt the Empress, if you can hurt those who sent soldiers to kill my father and countless others, then I want to help you. My mother was right. The endless war, the endless conquests, they serve only the Empress's hunger. Perhaps if you escape, perhaps if humans fight back effectively, perhaps something will change." That night was moved to a transport vessel by guards who believed they were transferring him to a deep space detention facility. This was part of the Empress's plan. The detention facility was designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the Empire. It was considered escape-proof. The Empress believed would die there, either from the harsh conditions or from the other prisoners. The transport vessel was small, designed to carry cargo and dangerous prisoners. There were only 3 crew members on board. The commander was an older soldier named. The 2 support crew members were younger, less experienced. As the vessel lifted off from the palace was kept in a holding cell. He could hear the crew speaking in the adjacent chamber. They were discussing their route, their schedule, their next stop at a refueling station. Began to move. He had spent 7 years learning the layout of the palace. He had studied security systems and access codes. He had learned the capabilities of technology. He had learned how to move silently, how to observe without being observed, how to think like someone planning survival rather than someone planning conquest. The lock on his cell was sophisticated, but had watched engineers repair similar locks. He had understood the mechanisms. He had memorized the override sequences. With patience and care, he manipulated the lock. It took him nearly 2 hours, but finally the cell door slid open. The supporting crew were asleep in the crew quarters. The commander was in the cockpit, piloting the vessel through space. Moved with absolute silence, carrying himself with the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. He reached the cockpit without making a sound. Commander was looking out at the stars, lost in his own thoughts. Did not want to kill him. His mother had taught him that killing should be a last resort, not a first option. But his mother had also taught him that survival was paramount. Struck the commander once on the back of his neck, hitting a specific point that doctor had once explained to him. It was the pressure point that would cause unconsciousness without permanent damage. Commander collapsed forward onto his controls. The 2 supporting crew awakened moments later, but they were trained for safety protocols, not combat. Used their own vessel's tools to disable them, leaving them unconscious but alive. He took control of the transport vessel and changed its trajectory. Instead of heading to the detention facility, he sent a message through the encrypted channels that had taught him to access. He included the military intelligence he had discovered in the palace archives. He included coordinates for Earth. He included information about fleet compositions and strategic positions. Most importantly, he identified himself. "This is," his message began. "I am a human survivor from the 442B research station. I was taken as a trophy by the Empire. I have lived in the Imperial Palace for 7 years. I am now providing you with critical intelligence. The Empress is planning an offensive against Earth. The fleet is gathering at coordinates which follow. You must prepare your defenses." He sent the message across all human communications channels that he could access. He knew they would detect it. He knew his escape would be discovered almost immediately. But he also knew that the message would reach at least someone. It would reach someone who could use the transport vessel moved through space like a small fish fleeing from larger predators. Behind it, warships gave chase, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly energy. Piloted the vessel with skill born from studying navigational systems for 7 years, twisting and turning through asteroid fields, using the natural obstacles to his advantage. A plasma bolt scorched past the vessel's hull. Alarms screamed inside the transport, made a calculation. The vessel was not fast enough to outrun the warships. It was not armed enough to fight them. But it did not need to be. It needed only to reach the asteroid fields where the human resistance was hiding. He pushed the vessel faster, ignoring the warning systems that told him the engines were overheating. Another plasma bolt struck the rear of the transport, damaging the left thruster. The vessel began to spin uncontrollably, gripped the controls and pulled hard, correcting the spin at the exact moment before the entire ship would have twisted into a fatal spin. Through the viewport, he could see a massive asteroid ahead. It was pitted and from ancient collisions. It was perfect. Aim the transport directly at it. The pursuing warships broke off their attack. Their tactical systems predicted that the human vessel would crash into the asteroid and be destroyed. They did not understand that this was exactly what wanted them to think. At the final moment, cut the engines and released a cascade of debris from the transport. The vessel slipped underneath the asteroid's trajectory, moving in a slow drift toward a series of caves on the asteroid's surface. The debris cloud continued on the original trajectory, and from the perspective, the transport vessel was destroyed. Guided the disabled vessel into the largest cave. The interior was massive, carved by what must have been cosmic collisions over billions of years. He set the transport down on the cave floor and cut all power systems, making the vessel invisible to active sensors. Then he sat in the darkness and waited. Hours passed, could hear the warships searching the asteroid field, their sensors sweeping across the space looking for survivors. He could hear their communication channels discussing the success of their interception. They believed the human was dead. They believed the problem was solved. But was alive, and he was exactly where he needed to be. When the warships finally left, satisfied that the threat had been eliminated, powered up the transport again. The engines were damaged, but they still functioned. He sent a low-power, encrypted signal on a frequency he had learned from the palace archives. A frequency used by human resistance cells to communicate with each other across the vast distances of space. The signal was simple. Alive, need pickup, have critical intelligence. For 3 days, nothing happened. Rationed the water and food from the transport stores. He checked the weapons systems, finding that the vessel had a single plasma cannon. It was not much, but it was something. He examined the damage to the vessel, making repairs where he could with the tools available. On the 4th day, he detected movement outside the asteroid cave. A human ship emerged from the darkness of space. It was a military vessel, smaller than the warships but far more nimble and efficient. Its hull bore the scars of multiple battles. The ship moved with practiced caution, its sensors sweeping across the asteroid before approaching. Watched the vessel carefully. It could be a trap. They could have detected his signal and sent a fake response. But his mother had taught him to calculate risks. The probability that this was a legitimate human vessel was higher than the probability of deception. He activated the transport's docking systems. The human vessel extended a docking bridge and made his way through the transport to the airlock. As it opened, he came face to face with a human woman for the first time since his mother's death. She was tall and muscular, with dark hair pulled back severely from her face. Her uniform bore the insignia of a military captain. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they focused on with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed. "You are the human who sent the signal," the woman said. It was not a question. "I am," he replied in English, though his accent was marked with inflections. I was taken from 442B Research Station 7 years ago. I have lived in the Imperial Palace of the Empire. I have intelligence regarding military movements and strategic capabilities. The woman stepped closer, studying him carefully. You speak English with an accent. You speak with the knowledge of someone who has studied military systems. You are small by human standards, suggesting malnutrition during critical growth periods. All of this is consistent with what I have stated, said. Yes, the woman agreed. My name is Captain Elizabeth Monroe. I command the human resistance forces in this region of space. I am going to take you to our base. On the way, you are going to tell me everything you know about military operations. If you are lying, I will know. If you are a spy, I will kill you. Do you understand? I understand, said. The journey to the human resistance base took 2 days. It was located deep within an asteroid field in a system that they had not bothered to survey. The resistance had carved out a hidden stronghold from the asteroids themselves, constructing facilities inside hollowed-out rocks and shielded from standard sensors. Captain Monroe brought to an interrogation chamber. For 12 hours, she questioned him about everything. She asked about palace layouts, security systems, military unit compositions, weapons capabilities, supply lines, and strategic doctrine. She asked about the Empress herself, about her personality and her decision-making processes. Answered every question completely and honestly. He held nothing back. He had lived with them long enough to understand that they had no concept of how to truly defeat humans. They believed that superior technology and superior numbers would always triumph. They did not understand that humans were adaptable in ways that they could not predict or counter. When the interrogation was complete, Captain Monroe made a decision. You are telling the truth, she said. Your information is consistent with intelligence we have gathered from other sources. More importantly, you have provided us with specific details that only someone with direct access to the Imperial Palace could know. You have information that changes the strategic calculations we have been working with. I have more than just information, said. I have something else. What? Monroe asked. I have understanding, said. I understand how they think. I understand their assumptions. I understand what they believe to be true about humans. They believe we are weak because we are willing to die for those we care about. They see sacrifice as weakness. They believe that technology and force always triumph over compassion and will. But they are wrong. Why are you telling me this? Monroe asked. Because they are wrong about me most of all, said. I am standing here because my mother taught me to survive. I am standing here because a young named showed me kindness. I am standing here because I understand that the things they see as weakness are actually strength. I am a weapon, Captain Monroe. I am the weapon they created when they raised a human in their palace and expected him to break. Captain Monroe was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a cold smile, the smile of someone who had spent years waiting for an advantage. Then let us teach the Empire what happens when they create weapons they do not understand, she said. Over the following weeks, worked with the human resistance. He provided detailed information about vulnerabilities. He identified weak points in their security systems. He explained the cultural assumptions that would make certain tactics effective. He showed them how to think like so they could defeat them. But more than that, he showed them something else. He showed them that it was possible to bridge the gap between worlds, that a human raised among aliens could still remain human, that compassion and adaptability and the will to survive could triumph over even the most advanced military technology. The Empress had declared him a human monster. She had been right, though not in the way she intended. Was a monster, but not because of his weakness. He was a monster because of his strength. He was a monster because he had learned from his enemies and would now teach those enemies the cost of their arrogance. The manhunt continued across space. Empress offered a reward for his capture. Every ship was ordered to destroy him on sight, but had already vanished into the shadow of human resistance operations. He had become a ghost in the machine, a human who understood the machine completely. And the Empress did not yet understand that she had already lost. The war was still coming. The battles were still to be fought. But the Empress had already made her greatest mistake. She had underestimated what a human would do when given the knowledge, the motivation, and the will to fight back. The battle was going to start in 17 minutes. Stood in the command center of the human flagship, watching the tactical displays showing the dreadnought approaching. The ship was massive, 3 kilometers long, equipped with weapon systems designed to obliterate entire planets. It was called the Eternal Judgment, and it was Admiral's personal command vessel. Admiral had been the commander of the forces during the first assault on human space. He had killed thousands of humans in his campaigns. He had enslaved entire colonies. He believed himself to be invincible. Today, he would learn otherwise. "All human vessels report ready status," Captain Monroe announced. "Strike teams are in position. We are committed to the operation." Nodded, this was the moment they had been preparing for. Over the past 6 months, the human resistance had gathered every available warship, every fighter, every soldier. They had planned this assault with military precision, but they also had something they did not have. They had... "Begin attack run," Monroe commanded. The human fighter squadrons accelerated toward the dreadnought. They were outnumbered and the dreadnought's defensive systems came online, sending waves of plasma fire into space. Human fighters exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The cost was immediate and brutal. But the human pilots did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They flew directly at the overwhelming firepower and they kept attacking. They were doing exactly what they expected them to do. They were doing exactly what the tactical computer predicted they would do. They were, in other words, following's plan perfectly. While the weapons focused on the fighter squadrons, a smaller group of human assault vessels broke through their defensive formation. These vessels did not fire on the dreadnought's main weapon systems. They did not attack the shields. Instead, they targeted the specific docking bays that had identified from his years in the Imperial Palace. Ships were designed the same way throughout the Empire. There was a reason for this. Standardization meant easier supply lines, easier repairs, easier command structure. It also meant that what worked on one warship would work on all of them. Had studied the systems of these ships for years. He had memorized the layout of the docking bays. He had learned where the security systems had their vulnerabilities. Now he was going to exploit them. A human assault team, 12 soldiers strong, landed in the exposed docking bay. Was with them, moving as quickly as his smaller human body could manage. The garrison in the bay was not prepared for an internal assault. They had expected the attack to come from outside the vessel. They had not expected the threat to come from within. "Go, go, go," called out, running forward alongside the assault team leader, a veteran soldier named, had been fighting for 5 years. He had lost comrades, family, everything to the Empire. He did not hesitate in his assault. The guards opened fire. The battle was chaotic and brutal, but the human soldiers had trained specifically for this operation. They had studied the layouts had provided. They understood the objective. They understood that this was a suicide mission from the start. They were going to do it anyway. Moved through the docking bay with precision, hitting the specific control panels that would lock down the doors. They tried to retreat to deeper positions within the vessel, but's knowledge of the ship's design allowed him to cut off their escape routes. Within minutes, the docking bay was secure. "Move to the engine room," commanded, his voice calm despite the violence occurring around him. "We have 8 minutes before they can restore defensive protocols." The assault team moved through the interior of the dreadnought. They encountered resistance at several points, but each time, knowledge of the ship's layout allowed them to anticipate and overcome the opposition. He understood the ways the thought. He understood the way they would respond to the assault. The engine room was guarded by 20 soldiers. The human assault team was down to 8 members. By any rational calculation, they should not have survived. But had learned that human survival does not always follow rational calculations. It follows will. It follows determination. It follows the willingness to sacrifice everything for a goal greater than oneself. Charged forward, his weapon firing. 2 soldiers fell. 3 more. Moved alongside him, not because he was the strongest fighter, but because he understood exactly what button to press to shut down the security protocols that would otherwise prevent them from accessing the engine core. The final soldiers fell. The human assault team stood in the engine room, having accomplished what should have been impossible. "Plant the charges," commanded. "We have 4 minutes." As the human soldiers prepared the explosives, made his way to the dreadnought's communication system. He activated the open channel, making sure every in the Empire could hear his message. "Empire," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I am the human who was taken as your trophy. I am the trophy that defeated you. Your eternal judgment is about to be destroyed, and I want you to understand why. You underestimated us because you measured strength only in weapons and technology. You did not measure it in will. You did not measure it in the willingness to die for those we love. You thought these things were weakness. You were wrong. The explosives detonated. The engine core of the Eternal Judgment went critical. The dreadnought began to tear itself apart from the inside out, and the remaining members of the assault team ran toward their extraction point. The ship was collapsing around them, corridors twisting, walls falling, gravity failing. They reached their fighter vessel with 30 seconds to spare. As they accelerated away from the dreadnought, they watched as it collapsed into itself, breaking apart, scattering debris across space. Admiral died in the destruction. Thousands of soldiers died with him, but more importantly, the myth of invincibility died with them. The Empire would recover. They would rebuild, but they would never again believe themselves to be undefeatable. The remaining battles of the campaign followed the same pattern, provided intelligence. The human resistance used that intelligence to strike at weaknesses. The believing themselves superior made the same strategic errors over and over again. They did not adapt because they did not believe adaptation was necessary. Within 6 months, the offensive was shattered. Their fleet had taken catastrophic losses. Their colonies in Sector 7 were falling to human counterattacks. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was being pushed back, but did not celebrate the military victories. Instead, when the fighting was finished, he made a different choice. At 18 years old, became an ambassador. He negotiated with the lower caste who had begun to question the Empress's leadership. He explained that humans did not seek to conquer the Empire. They sought only to protect their own people and to free those who had been enslaved. His efforts bore fruit. A faction within the military broke away from the Empress. They deposed her and began reforms. Not all accepted these changes, but enough did that the tide had turned. One day, received a message on an encrypted channel. It was from. The message began, "I do not know if this will reach you. I do not know if you are still alive, but I had to try. My family is safe now. The new government is different from the old one. There is hope now, something we did not have before. I helped cause the fall of the Empress. I helped because you showed me that change was possible. I hope that perhaps one day, when the wounds are healed, humans and might find a way to coexist. I hope you will consider coming back someday. Not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, but as a friend." Read the message 3 times. He thought of his mother. He thought of the research station burning. He thought of 7 years in the palace. He thought of everything he had lost and everything he had gained. He made a decision. 18 months later, stood in a diplomatic chamber on a neutral planet. Representatives from 100 different species gathered to hear him speak. Humans stood on one side, stood on the other. Between them stood, no longer small and fragile, but no longer hardened into a weapon either. He was simply human. "We gather here because war has made us question who we are," said. "The Empire believed that strength came only from conquest and domination. My people believed that we had to fight with everything we possessed just to survive. Both sides were wrong. Strength comes from the willingness to choose peace even when we could choose victory. Strength comes from mercy." In the chamber, stood among the delegates. When finished speaking, he was the first to step forward and extend his hand to a human representative. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. The work of peace would be difficult. There would be those who wanted to continue the war. There would be setbacks and failures, but the message had been sent across the galaxy. Humans and could coexist. Different species could find common ground. Outside the diplomatic chamber, through a wide viewport, the stars shone with ancient light. Somewhere among those stars was Earth. Somewhere was the research station where his mother had died. Somewhere were billions of humans who would never know his name, but who would live because of what he had accomplished. Looked at those stars, and he thought of the child who had watched his mother die in the ruins of a burning station. That child had learned to survive. That child had learned to adapt. That child had learned to fight. That child had become something far greater than the trophy the Empire had expected him to be. He had become proof that humans possessed a strength that could never be destroyed by weapons or technology. He had become proof that compassion and will and the desire to protect the innocent could triumph over any force in the universe. The monster that they had raised had finally shown them what it truly meant to be human. And it would reach someone who could prepare humanity for what was coming. As prepared the transport vessel to jump into faster-than-light travel, he saw the incoming signals. Warships were being diverted to intercept him. The manhunt had begun, but had already disappeared into space, heading toward the asteroid fields where he had learned human resistance cells were hiding. He was no longer a trophy. He was no longer a specimen. He was something the Empress had not expected him to become. He was the thing that would teach humanity how to fight back. Operations across multiple star systems. Humanity was fighting back. His mother had taught him one crucial thing before she died. Know your enemy, know the land, know yourself, and you will never lose a war. For 7 years, had known his enemy completely. Now, finally, he was beginning to understand the land beyond the palace walls. And he was beginning to understand what he had to do. He began to watch, he began to listen, he began to learn. And somewhere deep inside, in a place even he did not yet understand, felt something wake. It was not hatred, it was not anger, it was something deeper, it was survival. It was the will to endure. It was the thing that made humans dangerous.